Hello everyone, Sahili here from the Classcipe operations team. Welcome to the Classcipe TeachMeet second edition. Classcipe is a New Zealand-based company aiming to create a global community for educators and learners to share their knowledge and experiences with each other. With us, you can create your unit plan and tasks more easily and customize your template with accurate content recommendations. Our platform function includes interactive slides, customized templates, online, offline, hybrid learning functions, managing classroom, co-teach, instant feedback, and many more. You can create your own PD content, conduct FIPS sessions, and become a workshop facilitator. You can use the resources in our library and contribute to it as well. Do follow us on our social media to receive more information and updates. Moving on to the issuance of certificates, the certificate of attendance will be issued to those who are attending the live session uninterrupted till the end. The feedback form will be sent to the chat box. You need to fill up and submit in order to get the certificate. We take 14 working days to issue certificates. Now let me welcome our esteemed workshop facilitator, Mr. Patrick Ong. Patrick is an accomplished professional with a distinguished academic background. With a career spanning over a decade, Patrick has garnered extensive experience in various roles within IB Continuum schools. His impressive track record includes serving as a coordinator for the MYP and DP programs, supervisor and coordinator for personal projects and extended essays, and an advisor to school management on IB matters. He has also led IB schools as academic dean, head of secondary, and dean of schools. Currently operating as an independent consultant, Patrick collaborates with schools that aspire to develop comprehensive international programs of study. Furthermore, he imparts his knowledge and expertise as a university lecturer, guiding and inspiring students. Adding to his diverse portfolio, Patrick serves as a talent acquisition associate for Philippines at Classcipe, contributing to the acquisition and exceptional talent for the organization. He takes on various key roles within the IB network, including workshop leader, verification visit team member, and leader consultant, evaluation and program leader, examination inspector, and BQC reviewer. Please join me in welcoming Patrick among us. Very warm welcome, Patrick, to the session. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries. Thank you, Saheli. Welcome everyone, and good afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you are. This session really is about a topic that's very, very close to my heart, because when I started with IB schools, I was an MYP teacher, but I was also a technology coordinator, as the school I was at was building its high school campus. And so essentially, when we talk about tech integration, this workshop or this webinar is really for administrators, for teachers, anyone who engages with technology at the school, and understanding how we might strategically look into technology integration at various levels at the school. Yeah. So this is one of the topics that's been assigned by Classcipe for workshops like this. And really the focus here is developing a plan for integrating technology into instruction to enhance student learning and engagement. We are not giving you guys a one pathway to technology integration. We all know, being in IB schools, that a lot of the work that we do has to be contextual to schools. Yeah. And so what we're hoping to do in the next 45 minutes is really to get you guys thinking, have conversations, expose you to some resources, speak from my experience and share experience as well through the interactive nature of Classcipe and this platform, and have that conversation and begin to ask ourselves questions that we can take back to our schools. Yeah. So because we are catering to IB schools, I felt the easiest way to start really is to begin from the program standards and practices. If you are in authorized schools, regardless of program, you will be engaging with this model as you guys prepare for your program evaluation, or as you self-reflect as a school in terms of how you guys are implementing your IB programs. I figured this was a great way for us to look at technology integration from understanding school context, which is where we acknowledge where we are in place and time, looking at the purpose of technology integration, looking at the environments in which technology integration would be successful or feasible at your schools, establishing a culture for technology integration and how we institutionalize processes at the school, and have a go at looking at how all of this comes together in terms of practice. Yeah. So that's how we're going to be looking at things from in the next 40 or so minutes. So I kind of wanted to start with a conversation about where we are in place and time. When I remember in high school, I'm going to reveal my age, around 30, almost 25 years ago, when the Macintoshes, the Macintosh computer, those boxy computers were introduced at our school. And, no one wanted to touch it. Like, our school principal was an Apple person. There was a whole Mac lab of 30 computers and no one wanted to touch it. None of our teachers wanted to touch it. And it really was because they weren't familiar with the technology, right? These were expensive computers and they didn't know how to operate them because they were so different to Windows, I think XP at the time, right? Like years and years ago. And so technology integration isn't anything new, but I think where we are presently, especially emerging from the pandemic, we are in a renewed reality, yeah, in terms of the role of technology in teaching and learning. And so I'm basing this on a fantastic book called 21st Century Skills. If you guys are in any way working on approaches to learning in any shape or form in your school, this is a fantastic resource to look into if you guys are interested. And in this book, Trilling and Fadel talk about the idea of 4 converging forces that contribute to 21st century learning. Yeah. And these are the things that, drive what schools need to be or need to become in preparation for the 22nd century. Yeah. So when we talk about knowledge work, for example, knowledge work for us pretty much refers to how students gain knowledge and how students engage with knowledge. And engaging with knowledge in the here and now, let's face it, and we know this as people who work in IB schools, when we talk about engaging with knowledge, we do it collaboratively. Yeah, everything is really about collaboration now. And if COVID has taught us anything, collaboration really does engage with technology. Yeah. Years ago, I think none of us would have thought of Zoom. I don't even think Zoom was a company years ago. We were all on WebEx and Skype and all that. And suddenly here comes Zoom or Google Meets or all these software that we've used to video conference, to network, to work with other people. And so, when we think about knowledge work, it really dovetails with the use of technology, and it really is, 1, collaborative, and 2, a lot of it is really about developing solutions. Yeah. So when we use knowledge, it aims to serve a purpose, right? So thinking about your GRASP tasks, right? In MYP assessment, thinking about your authentic assessment tasks and how all of those really are framing student learning, student engagement with knowledge and understanding from an authentic real world setting. Yeah. So knowledge work really is changing, as opposed to how we learned in school, where it was a lot about really remembering everything and being able to regurgitate what we remember in a test. Yeah. Thinking tools, we know, in terms of approaches to learning, we've heard it all. And it really is about analyzing data. And more than just analyzing data, we want students essentially to think about how to prioritize knowledge, right? Because let's face it, in the diploma, for example, there's so much knowledge that kids have to deal with from their 6 subjects, from the core. And it really is about how do we teach kids to prioritize knowledge that is either more important or actually something that they need to engage with more in terms of their learning and in terms of their engagement with the world. Yeah. So thinking tools really are about analyzing data, critical thinking, and how we get kids to understand which knowledge is more important than others, or even which knowledge or which bits of knowledge are more authentic and true than others. Yeah. So it's also being able to gauge that knowledge. Digital lifestyles. And I know that Saheli's kind of gotten people to submit the answers, but really it's quite interesting because I think a lot of technology integration has to do with this whole idea of digital lifestyles because a lot of it is about readiness. Yeah. So the book actually talks about the digital native. And I think this would be our Gen Zs to some extent, millennials, in terms of people who have grown up in the age of modern technology. Yeah. So it's people who have grown up on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, right? Kids who have grown up on Google and or Yahoo, right? Whereas when we talk about digital immigrants, it's people who are used to pen and paper, used to more analog ways of doing things. So it's really in a lot of ways, our generation, the boomers, the Gen X people who grew up, possibly our earliest engagement with technology, it's Netscape Navigator, right? Or MIRC. And if you know those terms that I'm talking about, you know we're of the same age, yeah? So when we talk about them digital immigrants, it's people who are used to a certain way of doing things prior to the postmodern technology we're dealing with now and are learning what kids are using now, learning what the tools are that are out there, yeah? And then I've added this term called the digital foreigner, who has really not engaged, right, with the technology, who has stuck to their analog roots, yeah? So I wonder really how many of us, if you think about it, are digital natives, and this will really reveal our age, whoever's younger, whoever's older, who actually grew up as digital natives, who have been migrating, right, into the technology that we're used to now, or who are still foreign to it, who are clueless. Like I'm familiar with TikTok. I've not really used it, so I think I'm an immigrant. And there's this whole new thing called Threads now that just appeared 2 days ago. If you haven't heard, like it's Instagram's version of Twitter, right? And they've come up with their own thing called Threads. So it's how much of the digital age have we lived in? Yeah. So I see a lot of people on this chat are digital natives and immigrants. No one's a foreigner. That's amazing. So yeah, so that's the other thing, right? In terms of thinking about 21st century learning leading to the 22nd century, how many of us are actually, when we think about the digital lifestyles of our school community, of our school context, right? It really does lend itself to understanding how teaching and learning can be more effective, right? And then we talk about learning research. And learning research really is learning about learning. Yeah. So you can talk about brain-based learning. You can talk about all these theories from Bruner all the way to anyone in the bibliography of any IB document. But when we think about learning research, a lot of it, and some of the things that have come up in the last few years is about authentic learning, right? Looking at how to set learning in an authentic real world scenario, thinking about mental model building, right? Which is why the IB is so big on concept-based teaching and learning, because it is about being able to develop and build models based on abstract knowledge, yeah, and making sense of the learning that we have. Internal motivation is one of the factors that we have to consider, how we get kids engaged and motivated in terms of the inquiry, understanding multiple intelligences and how we might engage students differently depending on their learning styles and their intelligences, just social learning and the ability for students to collaborate. Yeah. And this was quite interesting looking at the learning research engagement, because if you think about these five, and if you're aware or if you've gone through the approaches to teaching of the IB, they actually align pretty well in terms of teaching through context, concept-based teaching, collaboration, collaborative approaches, differentiation. Yeah. So this is the world we're living in. You know what I mean? Like if we think about all these four domains, this is actually the reality that Trilling and Fadel have laid forth for schools to realize that, if we are, as the late Sir Ken Robinson says, to shift education, right? To shift from that very old antiquated model. These four are the considerations that we would need to look at vis-a-vis school context. Yeah, vis-a-vis your school, right? Because for example, a Catholic school would have very different implications as opposed to an all-boys school or an all-girls school or a non-sectarian school. Yeah. So understanding the research behind the need for education today vis-a-vis your school context is going to be really important for any strategic decision that schools will do, including technology integration. So if you guys have questions, comments, please feel free to put them through the Zoom chat. So just I have the Zoom chat open, and Certain and Saheli are there as well. Yeah. So let's talk about purpose, right? If we know that technology is inevitable, yeah, in terms of kids' lives, in terms of the lives we live in, the world we live in, let's talk about purpose, yeah. And I always say, I've done a lot of school visits, and I always tell schools, it's purpose that drives everything, right? If we have a very strong and clear purpose for anything we do at schools, everything else becomes easy, yeah, for as long as purpose is clear. So this is the first area that we always talk about in any discussion about strategic decisions at a school. And so it's quite interesting, whenever I go to schools, I always hear these, right? I've worked with Apple as a challenge-based challenge-based learning coach for Asia Pacific. And so when I go to schools on behalf of Apple, I always hear these stories about, we are an Apple school, you know what I mean? And we are a Google school, and we use Toddle, we subscribe to all these brands. And one of the big questions I always ask is, what is it about the brand that makes sense? And 60% of the time, I don't get a clear answer, right? When we think about the technology we use, we really do have to consider the purpose of the technology, right? Why would we subscribe to Samsung, for example, over Apple? Yeah. Why would we, for example, subscribe to Google, right? Because if we are thinking about technology as branding, it's going to be really hard for the use of this technology to be effective. Yeah. We do need to understand, and this has to be something that you guys take away to schools, if in case it's not built into your school's ethos. Technology is a tool. Yeah. Technology is a tool that we use for, strengthening teaching and learning, right? Because the bottom line is, any school is all about and is centered on teaching and learning. And so when we think about the technology that we subscribe to, the decision has to be centered on teaching and learning, right? So for example, I would not see the point of being a Google school in China, right? Because then everyone will have to have a VPN. Yeah. There is also an argument for schools not to subscribe to one type of device, right? Or one brand. It could be that every student has a laptop and that's it, right? So we do have to think about what the purpose of the technology that we're bringing in is, right? There's nothing wrong with subscribing to a singular vendor. We do have to just think about making sure that it does serve the purpose of schools, yeah, of the school, given its particular context, yeah, especially because we know technology is not the cheapest thing, right, to invest in. And so, Filipinos like to mispronounce words. I always use this Filipino pun where we, decisions about technology, they really have to be strategic rather than, it's strategy over strategy, right? So we do want to make sure that if the school is bringing in a certain technology or a certain vendor, that it clearly serves a purpose that's worth the school's while, finances, and efforts, yeah? So I thought about, when we think about an inquiry question for purpose, it really does lend itself to this. How does technology integration contribute to learning? Yeah, anything, if you look at the IB program standards and practices, everything lends itself to learning, and learning is at the heart of any IB school. It is at the heart of the IB standards and practices. And so anything that we do, how does it serve a purpose that contributes to learning? So that's going to be really important for the school. So here's an example that I kind of want you guys to think about. That's a good question, Jyoti, and hello, Jyoti. I think a lot of it will, again, there is no one answer to what makes technology worth it. It really depends on your school context and your needs, yeah? So let's go through an exercise to kind of give you a glimpse of how you might determine what technology would be worth the investment. So here's an example of, this is a thought exercise. So one of the things that I normally suggest to schools is to take one of the requirements of the IB or of any body of accreditation that you guys subscribe to, CIS or WASC, or national requirements, and think about how technology, in this case, right, can be integrated to achieve your purpose. So here are the practices for Leadership 4. Leadership 4 under the IB for any school focuses on reviewing systems and processes to improve operations and sustainability. This is oftentimes a practice that schools have difficulty with, yeah, or schools overlook in terms of how do you use data to monitor operations and to ensure sustainability of the program, yeah? So we'll spend around 5 minutes. Think about, here are the specific practices under that green heading. Think about how technology might be used at your school so far, or how technology could be used, hypothetically, to serve any of these practices, yeah? So you guys can enter text to the in the slide. You might choose a specific one like 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, or in general, if you'd like to look at the big picture of Leadership 4, that green text. So if we align technology integration with purpose, and if this is one of the requirements of the IB that you have to hit for your program evaluation, how might technology integration help the school achieve this purpose? So think about something that's being done at your school, maybe, or something that you think can be done at your school. You know what I mean? Like, even though it hasn't happened yet. So Philip's like 4.1, Venus 4.1, 4.4. Like, how can you use technology for these? Like, for example, the school has systems and processes in place to document, share, and store curriculum. Like, what systems have you guys had at schools? Pankaj says technology became integrated in classrooms to engage students in teacher training, to train teachers, and in school operations. True, right? So think about if you were in the committee that your school has organized to say, look, how might we address these standards in the IB based on, using technology integration, yeah? So there you go. So Jyoti goes, well, we use ManageBack for 4.1, right? And so it's to document, to share, and to store, right? So if you think about the use of ManageBack, are you using it thoroughly enough to document, to share, and to store curriculum, right? Google Classroom for Ahmed, ManageBack for Philip, Toddle, yeah, absolutely. And see, this is exactly what I was saying. Like, I think it doesn't even have to be something that's out there. Like, you guys can develop your own learning management system, right? You guys can, as a school, if you have someone IT savvy enough, or you guys have contact with IT providers, then they can develop your learning management system for you. Or you guys can try out Classcipe, wink, wink, if you guys want to try a different setup, yeah? 4.4 to share. Duncan says to share information about the school, including reports. Absolutely, yeah? Absolutely. Technology can be used to bring stakeholders on the same page in relation with curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Yep. And here's the thing, right? One of the things that, and you guys are hitting on very clear and very concrete approaches that your schools have done. One of the things that's going to be really important for you to think about is rolling it out, right? So later on, when we talk about environments and culture and learning, we're going to have to think about how we roll it out. So in terms of purpose, we're able to identify certain platforms that we're using, certain elements that have certain technologies that we're using, but it really is about, okay, is this going to work with every stakeholder, right? And I saw someone said we need to involve parents, and that is really important. You know what I mean? Edwin mentioned that. I would want more involvement of stakeholders, especially parents, because you can roll out ManageBack, and I've seen a lot of schools do it. You can roll it out, but if parents don't use it, or if parents don't know how to use it, or if parents don't see the point of it, it's very difficult to be effectively used. You know what I mean? So involvement of stakeholders is really important, especially for something that big, because learning management software for 4.1, that's really big for schools. That's a big investment in terms of time, in terms of training, in terms of support, in terms of rolling it out and just, assuring that it does what the school uses it for. Yeah. Oh, Tyler talks about policies, and we'll talk about that in culture. Yeah. Chat GPT and homework and all that. Yep, absolutely. Technology will help organize and process data and information to ensure balance. Yes, technology can be used. So the first step really is to ensure when we bring in a new technology, whether it's a software or it's hardware, bringing in, like, say, an Apple Mac Lab, the question is what for, right? What purpose does it serve? Because as I mentioned earlier, any technology that you bring into the school, especially when it engages the school community, not just something internally used at the school, it does involve a lot of conversations, and it has to align with a clear purpose, right? Great points, guys. Here's another example that's closer to teachers, right? Because that first one is really about, administrators and coordinators. Here's something for teachers, right? And this again is, I identified this because this is one of the Waterloos of schools most of the time, because we never have enough time to collaborate. Schools will never have enough time to collaborate, yeah? So coherent curriculum 2 is teachers collaborate to design, plan, and deliver the school's IB programs. In what ways can technology integration help, serve this purpose, yeah? Or help schools and teachers collaborate on planning, on reflecting, on identifying connections in content, in concepts, and skills, addressing the elements of an IB education. What have your schools done in case they've done something tech-wise? Or what do you think might work for your schools if technology integration is considered a way to serve this purpose in schools? Manage back? Yep. And not just that, Sally, it's also the analytics. Like, if you guys have ever used Manage Back, there is that analytics button that gives you like a chart of all the global context being used and all the concepts, you know what I mean? So it's also about understanding everything that the tool can do, because sometimes we don't see all the features, yeah? Google Drive. And here's where school context comes in, right? I always say, by 20, especially because of 2020 to 2022, I think we've all experienced at different times death by Google Drive or death by Google Doc, you know what I mean? Where we just get, our Google Drive is just like all over the place, you know what I mean? And so a lot of us I don't, as much as I try not to look so much into emails or Google Docs because it's just so saturating, yeah? So sometimes it's also about finding creative alternatives to what's usually used. But I mean, Google is such a great tool, really. But again, like, if your school, if your teachers, if your staff are already quite saturated and quite overwhelmed by Google, you might want to try another platform just so that, it can be a bit more refreshing for teachers, yeah? Quizzes, Prodigy Game, yes. So if you think about all these things, right? Collaboration, when we think about collaboration, it's going to be really important. Padlet is a very strong tool. Yep, I completely agree. So if we think about, how we decide on technology integration, right? The first step really is purpose, right? And the first step is really looking at, what does the school require? What does the school need? Yeah. So if you are an IB school, the easiest place to start really would be your IB standards and practices. Like, take a look at one of these and see, okay, which one is an area that the school needs to work on, and how might technology integration help, right? So technology integration has to have a very clear purpose, yeah? And it has to align with school context. So if you guys are a WASC school or a CIS school or whatever, you guys can actually base your decisions on technology integration on a clear purpose to justify why you would consider an investment in tech, whether, again, if it's a software subscription or buying hardware and bringing it to the school, yeah? And hopefully not everything's about branding, yeah? And to go, oh, we are an iPad school, we are a one-to-one school. That's all well and great, but just make sure that it serves a pragmatic purpose leading to teaching and learning, yeah? A very clear alignment with teaching and learning. Great suggestion, guys. Yeah, Padlet. Padlet's a great tool. Like, I've used it for workshops. I've used it for curriculum mapping. It's a great tool if you guys play around with it and see all the features. Yeah. The other thing is that when we think about our mission statement, right? When we think about core values at a school, sometimes a lot of it tells you what the technology is for. So here's a sample from Penn State University about core values for technology integration. If you have a director for technology or an ICT coordinator or a technology integrationist, this is something that they can lead at the school, thinking about what, why we integrate technology. Yeah, because let's face it, it is inevitable. So here are 4 core values that are suggested by Penn State University for technology inclusion. It's not even integration, but technology inclusion at schools. Looking at innovative culture and leadership. So when we think about technology, how might technology innovate and change the way that we do things at school? Yeah, like the last school I worked at in Manila, I worked with as a consultant in Manila, they were still on typewriters when I joined the school. They had a print card catalog where all the cards were yellowing. If you think about it, how might technology improve or enhance how we do things? Yeah. And it is about having a culture of innovation and leadership looking at innovation at the school. Yeah. Digital fluency is a very important thing. How do we get digital foreigners and new digital migrants to understand the technology and what it brings to the classroom? Yeah, because a lot of it is about breaching comfort zones, getting teachers trained and supported. You know what I mean? Always having that support available so that if teachers are still uncomfortable with a certain technology that's being brought in, that they have support for it. Yes, there are coaches or there might be support staff or colleagues who might mentor or lead the mentoring for certain technology initiatives. Yeah. Digital pedagogies. How do we use the technology to teach? And I think this one, a lot of us were forced into in the pandemic, and we had to teach through Zoom. Like I've seen a teacher teach DP economics with chart paper behind him, but hey, use Zoom. So, that digital immigrant, or at least that migrating digital immigrant to be, is starting his journey. Yeah. How might we help teachers develop digital pedagogies or ways of teaching? Yeah. And again, we're back to student-centered learning. Absolutely, Sally, having tech mentors, right? To make that part of the teacher's workload for teachers who are keen to learn and to teach technologies, that's really helpful at schools. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a system, and we'll talk about systems in a bit. That's a systematic approach, right? To make sure that technology integration goes as smoothly as possible, because that also means teachers get the training, teachers have someone to run to, there is support at the school. Yeah. And it's not, hey, we're all using Padlet. Okay, thanks, bye. You know what I mean? Like if teachers have a hard time, they have someone to go to. So that whole idea of tech mentors, if that can be built into teacher workload, that would be fantastic. Yeah. And of course, it's all about student-centered learning. Yeah. And the idea that if we bring in, let's say, Padlet, how might this help us or allow us to turn over ownership of learning, agency to the kids? Yeah. How might this flip the switch from a teacher leading the lessons to students constructing their understanding and co-constructing their learning? So I put in the website if you guys want to have a look. I think if I'm not mistaken, Saheli and certain this slide deck will be available after the
Yes,
workshop. If you need to go back
yes,
and
yes.
look at the links, I put links to everything.
It will be
Am I
available.
right?
Yes, Patrick.
All right. So yeah, if you guys need to go back, just go back. Yeah, absolutely. So that's pretty much purpose. I think I belabored the point. And that whole thing is, look, anything, any technology that we bring to the school, it cannot be just because, oh, everyone else is doing it. Or, this is a marketing tool for the school. Because sometimes that's what happens in schools. So really, when we think about the purpose of technology integration, it really has to align and dovetail with learning. How does it reflect the school's values? How does it reflect the school's mission? How does it reflect what the school needs to do as a school based on accreditation requirements? How does it help the school ultimately develop and improve teaching and learning? Yeah. So before I move on, if there are any thoughts, aha moments, reflections, you guys can type it into the text box on on your Classcipe screens. So it's documented in, in the session when you come back to the session, yeah? Oh, absolutely, Philip. And, technology is such a great tool to get to that constructivist approach and start, even just using, someone mentioned Mentimeter, like even just using Mentimeter to access prior knowledge, you know what I mean? It's a great tool, honestly. So it's really about what tools can we use to support our initiatives for teaching and learning. Yeah. Oh, absolutely, Attic. There's nothing wrong with, I've been to a school where they didn't allow technology. I'm like, why? You know what I mean? Like, we'll talk about culture in a bit. And the great stride that IB has made in terms of talking about how Chat GPT and AI can complement learning. It shouldn't be a barrier to learning. I do a lot of these IB workshops for MYP teachers. And when teachers tell me I use Chat GPT to write statements of inquiry, and I go, why not? If it helps things become more efficient, why not? I'm glad I'm not leading an IB workshop right now because I would get so much flack for that. But really, right? If you think about it, if it makes life easier without sacrificing learning, what's the problem, right? Absolutely, Edwin. And we've seen it in schools, right? We've seen them in schools. We've seen it like it, in the school website, you have, the school logo, IB, WAS, CIS, Apple, or Samsung. And I'm like, why? Right? Nothing wrong with it. Don't get me wrong. I don't want, Tim Cook, coming down. It's really just, there has to be a reason. There has to be a purpose, because it will take a lot of money, not just for the school, but also for the community, right? And that's the thing, Jyoti. I think one of the things we need to talk about is, when we talk about environments right after this, one of the things that we do need to think about environments is what factors contribute to technology-related decisions, really, right? So, Manila, well, certain parts of Manila, is, there is a huge tutoring industry, right? So kids go to these academies after school, and when those tutors, those private tutors, do not understand the MYP, they end up doing the homework for the kids, right? Because they'll just do it. They can't help the kids. And so that's something cultural, you know what I mean? That's part of your environment. That's part of your school context, yeah? And so one of the things that I always say, Jyoti, for authenticity and avoiding plagiarism, the simplest way, especially for summative assessment in any of the programs, is have it done in school. Do them under exam conditions and be very clear about what technology they can use and what technology they can't. Yeah. I think when we talk about summative assessment, when we use the grades as a measure of student learning, we have to do that under exam conditions, which means in formative tasks, if Chat GPT is something that you feel can be integrated into the work, go ahead. But in terms of summative assessment, right, for the skills that you are assessing, you do have to limit the technology. And you can explain it to kids. We are taking an exam. You get what I mean? It's a project for grading. Hence, I cannot let you use ChatGPT because I'm not here to grade ChatGPT. I'm here to grade your skill development. And so, there are, again, and that is part of a technology decision, you know what I mean? Where you have ChatGPT informative work. I think if it helps the kids, especially those kids who cannot write to save their lives, like, if it's a tool that can help them, why not? If it doesn't go against, your subject objectives. But again, when we talk about summative assessment, there's where we go, can't use it, okay? The same way that in mathematics, there are times they can use a calculator, and there are times that they have to graph the bloody graph alone. You know what I mean? So it's really about when they can use the technology or not. Oh, absolutely, Jyoti. Like, yeah, it's all about setting things in exam conditions, yeah? Because that's what summative assessment is. And thank you for that segue, Jyoti. Really, we're talking about environment now. And see, for all good intentions, right? You've aligned your technology integration project with the purpose of the school. For all good intentions, environment and context will have to come into play. Yeah. And so when we talk about environment, we're looking at a few things. We are looking at human environment, right? Again, if your teachers are 80% digital foreigners, you might want to plan this more strategically, as opposed to having a staff that is mostly digital natives, yeah? And so rolling out new technologies becomes easier. So look at your human environment, your human resource complement, thinking about your local network infrastructure, yeah? So, I did a visit for a school that's doing the diploma in Myanmar, in Myanmar. And, given infrastructure there, they could hardly use, cellular data. Like, they don't have the network capacity. And it doesn't mean that you cannot be an IB school. It's just that how do you work around it? You know what I mean? Internet will not be a resource. So maybe most of the technology that will be used is offline, things that you can do without a connection, right? So it's thinking about that local network infrastructure as well. And even if you're not in a city that is network limited, your school might be located in an area where it is limited, right? It just so happened geographically, it's where your school is. So think about that access, yeah? Because the last thing you want is to bring the technology in and then you can't use it based on the local network infrastructure. Again, China and VPN, yeah? Certain places in Vietnam, right? Thinking about, okay, will the kids have access? Yeah, internet-wise, network-wise, yeah? The other thing is school infrastructure as well and resources. Like, will the school, and this is one thing where, the one-to-one thing comes into play. If and if you're not aware, one-to-one means one device per one student. And so your question would be, to what extent does the school provide resources and to what extent will kids provide their own resources? Yeah, if your school community, and this is where school resources come into play, if your school community cannot afford laptops, how might you get the kids to, will you have more computer labs in the school? I've seen schools that do iPads in MYP and laptops in diploma, because that's the level of device investment that parents can make in that school. That's absolutely fine. You know what I mean? So first consider purpose and then think about environment. Yeah. The other thing about that human environment is thinking about your staffing and having, like someone said, I think it's Saley, talking about teacher mentors, right? Will there be technology leaders at the school? Right? And in terms of learning facilitators or teachers, will there be certain teachers that you can tap to mentor anyone, parents, staff, kids, with new technologies? Yeah. Are there vendors? Like, I had a school that talked to me about, oh, can we do Apple at the school? But Apple wasn't in the country. And I'm like, are you willing to make that investment? You know what I mean? So considering the vendor, because part of having the vendor available in locally is also for tech support, right? For repairs, for whatever. So all of these things have to come into play. It's not just human environment in the school, but it's also locally with regard to the tech that you're bringing in. Yeah. I love how people are popping in questions. There's a side discussion going on e-assessment in the chat. That's amazing. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration, guys. It's not just the purpose of alignment and aligning the reason for tech integration with the school. It's the feasibility. So from purpose, we go to feasibility. How feasible is the technology integration that is being presented or being proposed given school environment? Yeah. When the lockdowns hit Manila, and I'm not sure if you guys know, we've been called the text messaging capital of the world. Like, we love texting. Like, every child and their dog had at least 2 cell phones in Manila. And so when Manila had to shift to online learning, the main device was phones. Like, everything had to be based on the phone because the environment was very little kids had iPads or laptops, but they all sure have cell phones and they all sure play games online, which means they have cellular data. So learning for a lot of schools shifted to phone interface, smartphone interface. Yeah. So again, local environment. Yeah. Absolutely, Pankaj. But at the same time, we also know, honestly, when we think about it, this is a big consideration, right? Because not every school will have the financial capacity to support huge technological, projects. The next thing is culture. So look, we've thought about why, we've thought about feasibility. And now it's setting the stage. And when we say culture in IB, we refer to the policies, because policies are institutional documented culture. Yeah. Anything that the school does in terms of practices, best practices, they are institutionalized through documentation. And so when we talk about culture in the IB, it is about policies. And when we think about policies, we're talking about systems thinking. We're also thinking about processes. Yeah. So when we talk about, for example, teachers requesting to subscribe to an app for their class, right? Or teachers requesting for certain hardware. These are things that have to have processes at the school, right? And approval systems, budgeting systems, yeah? So culture is going to be really important. So one of the things that always helps, I find, for school leaders who want to make a huge leap in technology integration is the use of a competency framework for teachers. Yeah. So it's so this is one from UNESCO. But when we talk about the competency framework, it's not just expectations, it's also ways, a framework for support in terms of when do we train teachers, when do we deepen their knowledge about the tech, right? When are teachers expected to be able to create their own materials through the technology? And so when we think about teacher expectations, and this is always the thing for schools, it's very easy for schools to write this and forget about this. You know what I mean? With expectations comes support, right? The same way that we always tell teachers, you cannot assess what you do not teach. So if we're going to assess teachers on certain expectations, we need to provide that support, yeah? And that support can come from processes, very clear processes for requesting for support, requesting for an app, structures in place. I have a technology leader, I have tech mentors, and resources at the school, yeah? And the very clear acceptable use policy. And there are many out there, but the side conversation that's been happening in the chat about how do we deal with ChatGPT? When can kids use it and when shouldn't they? That goes into acceptable use. That goes into policy. That goes into a document that goes, here is when ChatGPT is acceptable to use and when it's not, yeah? So that's going to be really important for us to remember when we set this whole any technology integration initiative up, yeah? So again, aligning with purpose, checking feasibility given the school environment and context, and once everything is set, laying down culture, laying down the processes and the structures and the resources, the human resource complement, the policies that will help make sure that the technology integration initiative is successful and smooth, yeah? So clearly, guys, it's not as simple as buying laptops and sending it to parents, yeah? Not as easy. There's a lot of thinking that has to be considered. Oh, Jyoti, this is exactly why I love this topic. You know, when I spoke with Saheli and she gave me this whole catalog of topics, I really latched onto this because I think it's the first time I'm ever able to talk about this. But hopefully there's a more sustained workshop for this where we can dive deeper, because this is really a dip dive. Again, with the Filipino mispronunciations, this is a dip dive rather than a deep dive. This is just me setting the stage for perspective, but I would love to do like a full-blown workshop on this because it is something that, you know, the IB doesn't really focus on, yeah, in terms of their PD. So this is an example of a process, you know, and again, this is from Penn State University. I have the website there. It goes through the whole process about, and if you are a design teacher, ladies and gents, because I'm a design teacher, it looks conspicuously like the MYP design cycle, right? So when you think about defining the initiative, purpose, right? Investigating solutions, adopting a solution, reviewing and iterating, all of this goes into culture, yeah? How are teachers meant to define an initiative that they want to put forth? How would they investigate solutions? What frameworks and templates are there, yeah? And I always say, whenever you write policy, whenever you think about all these things, clarity, simplicity, and support. The last thing you want is to write a 50,000-page document. The teachers will sooner say, okay, I'm just not going to do it because it's just too complicated, right? Clarity, simplicity, and support, because you want teachers to think about ways to better the teaching and learning at the school. So look, how does this all come together, right? How might the school, what is the easiest way for schools to start thinking about tech integration? If you guys are coordinators, you are very aware that with the 2020 standards and practices, you are required to write what we call program development plans, or what we lovingly and what schools dreadfully call the PDP, right? The idea that the IB now asks schools to do their own inquiry project based on a need. Yeah. And so you might have something that looks like this and go, look, one area that we want to work on is leadership 4.1. You know what I mean? Talking about the school has systems and processes. This is the one that we showed earlier, right? And so this is a process following this framework as an example in terms of how you might, this is the PDP in itself. You guys can take a year and do a technology integration initiative based on one of the standards and practices as a school, right? So surveying solutions, adopting a solution, so having a free demonstration, those are really important. Getting a free demonstration or trial period from a vendor so that you can try out the software, have a class pilot use it, making sure there's gradual implementation. You don't want to shock anyone, and how you might roll out the technology adoption strategically with budgeting, tech support, education, communication, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So from a school level, this is how you might use a framework like this in terms of how you would think about a technology initiative, yeah, an integration initiative that goes from purpose, environment, culture, and learning. The other thing is, again, as Atik says, it's ATL. So think about, let's think about, let's say, an ATL example. So if you are a teacher and you have this framework that's set in the school, then you can do ATL in terms of note-taking, for example, right? And how might you use technology if, and I use iPads here, assuming that the school is an iPad school, right? So what are the software, what are the apps available to students on the iPad that can help them do, note-taking? So this, this framework or any technology integration framework that your school might want to adopt, it's very helpful, not just at the macro above your pay grade level administratively, but also for any teacher who wants to think about how to teach more effectively, how to improve their teaching, right? So again, it really is about, if we go back, right? If we go back to essentially what we're talking about, it all comes down to learning, yeah? And technology integration cannot be about, oh, absolutely, this framework's amazing, you should get it, Jay. Like, I have the website, it's free, just use it. So go back to those IB standards, thinking about what's the purpose of what we're doing, what's the environment that we're in, so that we can zero in on contextual technological integration, right? How do we set things in practice? How do we establish a culture of technology integration? And how does this all center on learning? Because if anything we do is not about learning, it shouldn't be done in a school, right? We are about learning. So I know we kind of breezed through this. I'm glad that we've had conversations in the chat and stuff, because we did have 45 minutes for it, and Saheli might kill me. I'm already on my 49th. But thank you so much, really. And again, I think I want to end this session with a conversation about change management, because any new technology is about change, right? And I think anything that we do in terms of tech requires a respect for the change process. Change takes time. If we want change to work, it takes time, yeah? And think about it in terms of systems and strategies, because the more systematic the approach is, the easier it is to roll out, yeah? So with that, thank you so much for the last hour or so. This was a great conversation, and hopefully you guys have your technology integration plans, more informed after this. And hopefully we can have a bigger session on this, a longer session. But this was, I hope I was able to share a bit of resources and perspective, yeah, in terms of how you might think about technology integration at the school level, at the school-wide level, at the programmatic level, or even in your classroom, yeah, thinking about how you might integrate technology. So thank you so much for the last 45 minutes of listening to me. And I have my email address there if you want to reach out and have further conversations. I would love to have further conversations if you guys want to have conversations. So thank you so much for the last hour. And with that, Sahali, all
Yes,
yours.
Patrick. Yes, thank you so much for the lovely sessions. I just request everyone to fill up the feedback form that we sent in the chat so that it will help us to issue certificates for all of you. And we will keep the session on ongoing mode the same way you have joined the session today. You can join the same process to access all the slides for 1 week. For next 1 week, it will be available. So if you want to visit the resources, you can check all the resources, whatever Patrick has spoke about today. Maybe you can spend some more time on that. You can check, and yeah, and you can always get back to us or Patrick because he has already given his email. And thank you so much everyone for joining.
Have a good day, guys. Thanks for coming. This was fun.
Patrick, I'll not occupy you more now. If you want, you can just take a break now maybe and
No
enjoy
worries.
your
But
leftover evening.
it's a really good way to spend my Saturday, honestly. Like I got so engaged, planning for this. So yeah, it's
Saturday
great to have
takeaways. Yeah,
conversations with teachers.
yeah.
All right,
I
guys,
send the
see you soon whenever. The IB world is so small, and I'm sure the Classcipe world is the same way, yeah. I'm sure I'm gonna run into you guys soon.